being here.
This meeting is being recorded.
This meeting is being recorded. So really excited to be here with you today with a great team. Hopefully all of us working together to develop an implementable plan that we're all excited about for climate action in Northwest Indiana. So let's go ahead and start with introductions. I would like to start off by introducing myself and some of our partners who are kind of our core working team convening this process. So first of all, my name is Jen Birchfield. I am with the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission. I am our Natural Resources Planner. Also with us today from NRPC is Kathy Luther, who is our Director of Environmental Programs. And we also have Flor Baum. I'd like to thank Flor for setting up the meeting. She's an administrative assistant with NRPC. Also on what I'll call the NRPC team, I would like to introduce David Clifford. David is here with us. He is IU intern, for the McKinley Climate Intern. Did I get that right, David?
Definitely close. Yeah, it'll work.
Close enough.
Right.
But yeah, so David is a MPA student at IU SPIA program, and we're fortunate to have him as an intern with us in this process. And so with that, I don't think I've missed anyone else from NRPC. I will go ahead and I'd like to turn it over to Kathy Sipple, who is with Earth Charter Indiana, and happy to be a partner with Earth Charter Indiana in this process. And Kathy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, your team, and Earth Charter Indiana.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, as Jen said, I'm Kathy Sipple, and I live in Valparaiso, kind of in the middle of the region. And my title at Earth Charter Indiana is Senior Resiliency Coordinator. And so a lot of people who have my role around the state chose to work with a single city. And I just felt a real strong call to work regionally rather than just to say I wanted to try to help Valparaiso. It just seems like more than perhaps any other place in the state, we are in fact a region. And so about 2 years ago, I started working with Connie Wachala, who is on this call. And I want to also thank Nancy Moldenauer. Along with Connie and about 8 or 9 other people from the region, we went over to Goshen and attended the Climate Leadership Summit that Earth Charter Indiana puts on each year. And Nancy was presenting at that summit. Connie and a lot of the other folks from the region said, wow, this is great information. Why don't we do a mini version of this back at home? And so Connie, along with a handful of other folks, helped pull that off. They did a climate action blitz in February of 2020. And of course, that was right before COVID started. We'd hoped to get together and continue that momentum, but instead switched to Zoom. And we ended up talking to NRPC and asking them to last year be a part of Indiana University's Environmental Resilience Institute's cohort, where we worked on a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which is something that Gary had already done and Michigan City had already done in 2019, the very first cohort. So with our cohort, you're going to hear a lot more about that in Kathy Luther's presentation. I'm not going to take anything away from that. But so I've been around now for close to 3 years working with Earth Charter Indiana. And in January, it was really pleased to have Renee join. So I'll let Renee introduce herself briefly. She is in Crown Point. So we're trying to get some geographic diversity within our regional team. And Renee, do you want to say anything, a few words about yourself?
Oh, well, if you insist. I'm Renee Prejean-Matanky, and I live in Crown Point, Indiana, as Kathy just told you. I'm a strategic marketing and communications professional, and I bring my experience and a great deal of passion to the position of resilience coordinator at Earth Charter Indiana. I have hands-on experience in most aspects of the communications industry, and I've served as a marketing and communications leader, working for major entities ranging from the public and not-for-profit sectors to the engineering and transportation industries. So I believe that my diverse background lends tremendous dexterity to the way that I approach a project. And it's with that enthusiasm that, and my connection to Kathy, who I have known for several years, that I come to this cohort.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Wonderful to hear from everybody we have on the team here. And now we would really like to hear from everyone else in the room. We see the room filling up, which is wonderful. And since there are so many, we would like to suggest that rather than kind of doing a round robin, if we could just ask everyone to drop their name and affiliation into the chat. I will do so as well, so everyone has my contact information. So if people would please just continue to populate that Jamboard of what brings you here today, and also type in the chat your name and affiliation so we can use that as kind of attendance and introductions.
Jen, this is Kay. Is there a way that you can increase the size of the font on that slide?
On the Jamboard?
On Jamboard, you're doing your own, yeah, you can actually see this right on your own screen. That's what we're doing here. I think that was Kay. In
Yes.
chat, there's a link where you can go right to this board, and we're asking everybody to put on a little post-it on slide 1. Tell us why you're here. And you can make that as big as you want. When you're on that slide, you could drag it and click it and things like that, but shrink it back up to leave a little room for others. And if anybody is having trouble, you can private message me, and I will be happy to put your information on one of these post-it. Encourage you to get familiar with it because we're going to be using this technology later on in a group exercise. Thank you.
And I did receive a chat that said that the chat is not set up to message everyone, only the organizers. So if Flora's here and can hear me, maybe you can help me behind the scenes try to get that corrected, and I'll try to do that on my end as well.
Okay.
But yes, it would be great if everyone could message everyone rather than just me. Oh, I do see some people messaging. Oh, looks like just the organizers right now messaging everyone, so.
Oh, Sarah. Oh, Kathy put that in.
Well,
Okay,
as we-
I think I might have found it if I'm a co-host.
Yeah, as we work to continue working through that, we'll keep you updated. But certainly, if nothing else, we will be distributing the notes from the meeting so everyone can kind of take a look at who is present. And we'll also have some opportunities for everyone to kind of break out and get to know each other and discuss things a little bit later on. I do see some people messaging everyone now, so hopefully that's working. Yeah,
I found the button to change.
okay.
I changed it to everyone.
Awesome, thank you.
Kathy, this is Kay. How do I click on do a post-it note here? I'm sorry, I was a few minutes late joining.
That's
So, did
okay. Kay, did you click on the link that was in chat? I can post that again if anybody needs it.
Link in chat.
Yeah, it's a Jamboard link. Let me just copy and paste that one more time. Or if anybody else has it, they can get to
Yeah,
have
you
it here.
probably need to post it again, Kathy. I think the link may have been when we were limited to just our team. It was just corrected so that everyone can see
Yeah,
everyone's
because I don't see a link.
chat. So,
I just
So-
posted it. Can you see the last post that I did there? Okay, a link.
If you come in after it was posted, you won't see it. It's
Okay, I see a link that Jen put out. So we'll click on
Yep.
that.
go
Mhm.
ahead and click on that, and it should automatically scroll to page 1. So go
And
to
then Kay,
page 1.
I believe if you
Go
just
ahead.
click on one of those question marks, you can populate it. That's how I did it.
There, I see it. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
And we've had people rolling in. So anybody else who didn't get a chance yet, if you can just tell us, what brings you here today? If Jamboard is too tricky at this point, you can put it in chat and we'll get it there. And Jen, you just let me know when, since I'm not looking at the agenda, I've got this showing. Let me know if you want me to move along.
Okay, yep, I think we've got just a few more minutes. I know people are still trying to get that done. And maybe in the meantime, I don't know, Kathy, if you want to kind of read off some of the things that we're seeing, any common themes of why we're here?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. We've got to represent my municipality and make sure our effort contributes to the greater regional efforts. We really appreciate that. Jennifer Gonzala, she's been with us from the beginning, working on the greenhouse gas inventory last year from the town of Chesterton, only 2 more weeks. So I'm curious where you're going after that. I'm Jen Birchfield, who we've already heard from. Excited to hear there's insights and build momentum for creating a regional climate action plan together. David Clifford, who you just heard, for those of you who might have joined late, he's going to be our climate fellow this summer. So we're very thrilled to have him. He's an MPA student with SPIA. And let's see, Connie is from Highland, and I worked with her and Alex Bazan on the resilience cohort and wants to take this to the next step. I will also say Connie's been real involved with the town of Highland initiating starting a sustainability commission, which is exciting. Someone else just says, I care, and I got the invite. So very cool. Thank you. David Wright, Gary Transit is here because transit has been a key solution to mobile emission reduction. Yes, it is a big part of those emissions that we can influence, and we are going electric soon. Wonderful. Can't wait to hear more about that. Whoops. Okay. Let's see, Dan Repay, thank you for being here. Dan's been a real big supporter. Oh dear. Okay, maybe I can't increase that. He is with the Little Calumet River Basin Development Commission, worked several agencies in this meeting, looking forward to see where the group can help. And Jen, I'm afraid I'm not able to synthesize about themes as I go.
Yeah.
I almost have to read it all. If you want us to be moving on. I see we've got environmental groups represented, Valparaiso University is represented. We've got like really, really nice representation.
Great. Okay, well, yeah, we can go ahead and kind of wrap this up, but don't be shy if you're still coming in. Introduce yourself in the chat with your name and affiliation, and go ahead and click on our Jamboard link, and you can continue to populate this throughout the meeting. But with that, we'll go ahead and kind of wrap up our welcome and introductions. Kathy, anything else you wanted to add, just kind of housekeeping before we get into the presentation?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, one of our goals for this initiative, Renee and I have been working with Jen and Kathy Luther from NERC, just saying we really want this meeting to be reflective of what we hope will be the collaborative style of this whole work group and project. And so to that end, we want to introduce just a few meeting, housekeeping guidelines. You've all been on a lot of Zoom meetings probably over the last 2 years. If not, God bless you. I don't know how you got out of that, but just standard stuff. Mute yourself when you're not speaking so we don't have background noises and things like that. You can use the chat to convey your questions. We would like to hold for question time so that Kathy can get all the way through her presentation. She's going to share a little bit about how NERC has in their plan actually a community engagement strategy. And we're freely admitting that we're in the communicating one way, strategy right now, because the first bulk of what we've been doing has been very data driven, and we've been working with municipalities one-on-one. But now this is an exciting step where we become more engaging. And so to that end, we're going to try out some things like put you in breakout rooms after this one-way presentations that is more like the norm. So because of that, we're going to ask you to please be fully present. We don't want your, sharing partner to show up in an empty room while you're checking email or, whatever you might be doing. And we understand Zoom, sometimes it can be easy to drift off or multitask, but we ask you to be fully present. Some of you have seen parts of this next presentation a little bit. Some of you, it's brand new. So please, those of you who have seen it, just, be a little patient. If you have to check your email, that'd be a good time to do it because you've seen it. But everybody else who this is new for, please pay attention because there's a lot here. And we're going to be building off of that to go after. And I don't want to bore you with a lot of jargon, but just an overall strategy of what we're going to be employing is something called dynamic governance, which is consent decision making. We don't want to be telling you what we need to do. We really want to get input from as many people in the room. And we know we've got a lot of collective wisdom here. So we're going to be trying out some new methodologies in order to harvest the best ideas. So I think that's all you need to know for now. If you have any questions, you can let me know. And you can also give us feedback at the end to let us know what went well about this meeting for you and what you would like to see done differently, because we do want you to come back. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Kathy Luther.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited at the great turnout. Give me a minute here while I navigate and switch some things around. Hmm. Right. Share screen two. Okay, are you guys seeing a PowerPoint?
I see it.
Are you seeing, okay, just the PowerPoint or the presenter's view?
I am just seeing the PowerPoint.
All right, thank you. Um, so I'm gonna kind of do an introduction of what we've done so far towards this effort of regional climate action. Tell you kind of where we've been and how we got there, and then where we are now, and what we hope to be accomplishing over the next few months with all of your help. So that is more or less the plan, and I'm gonna jump into it. We have, as mentioned before, we in late 2020, after a year more of grassroots organizing by the NWI Region Resilience folks, all 3 county councils in Northwest Indiana passed resolutions asking NERC to apply to the IU Environmental Resiliency Institute for assistance in building a regional greenhouse gas emission inventory. That was really important to me as a one of the NERC leadership, that we have local support. We are your council of governments. We work for local governments, and we wanted to make sure that we were following their lead. I think, and they came through with flying colors. And so, in addition to the 3 counties, we had 11 other cities and towns that signed on and committed to participating in this. And the reason that is important, we're following a process laid out by ICLEI, which is the oldest, it's an international group of communities that work together on climate. It's probably the oldest one that's been in place. First, I can't tell you what the acronym stands for because it's French, so it doesn't make sense in English, but they are a leader in climate and sustainability at the local government level. Anyway, so the very process begins with leadership commitment. So that those resolutions from the county and all of the cities and towns participating and paying into the process really gave us at NERC the confidence to go ahead and start on milestone 1, which is the emissions inventory. So we completed this inventory in 2021. The most of them, Gary and Michigan City was already mentioned. They completed inventories in 2019, but they had used 2017 as their baseline year. So last year we also used 2017 as the baseline year, so that we have a common baseline inventory for all of these cities and towns in the 3 counties. These municipalities alone represent 63% of the region's population. And collectively, they account for 62% of the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So I think it's interesting that tracks pretty well. And it makes sense going forward that the population and the emissions track closely. So going back to the process wheel, we finished milestone 1, and we move into milestone 2. And at this point, Merrillville and the city of LaPorte are also engaging in their own community climate action planning, kind of at the same time and with us. And Gary is a few years ahead of us. They went ahead and began implementation processes. They have a climate action plan and have been engaging in activities to implement that over the last 2 years. Michigan City's Arrow, I don't know where it went, but Michigan City is also in with milestone 2 and milestone 3. They have the inventory, but I think that they're looking for maybe this process to kickstart them into more active planning phase. And before I start talking about the results, I wanted to talk a little bit about the process and a little bit of the lingo, because it does make a difference when we go into climate planning and we talk about different sources. Our inventory was performed using the Global Protocol for Community Scale Emissions, which was created and specified by the Global Covenant of Mayors, and also influenced by the U.S. Community Protocol, which is modified a little bit for U.S. Government applications. And when we talk about emissions, the inventory that we have captured here is focusing on Scope 1 emissions, which are emissions that come directly from within your city or county boundary, and Scope 2, which are emissions that come from energy generated on the grid and used within your community boundary. The reason for to focus on that is I think the theory behind that is that the emission sources within your boundaries are emission sources that you have control over. That may not necessarily be true, especially in our region with a lot of heavy industry that is regulated at the federal level, it's regulated at the state level, it's subject to a lot of international economic influences. So we don't necessarily control those at the local level, which I think it's important for us when we think about planning going forward. Jumping ahead a year, after we had 6 interns last year that worked with us, or climate fellows, and we inventoried all of the cities and the counties, and the total result was that our region emitted 49 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents approximately in 2017, which is hard to picture. I can't picture a million metric tons, but on average, that would 45 tons per person across the region. But if you look at the pie chart, over 80% of that was from the industrial emissions, both their grid electricity and grid and energy use, as well as their process emissions. I think it's important for us to understand and recognize that, and to the extent that those entities are changing over time due to regulation or due to their energy sources changing, we certainly want to account for that. But going forward, we want to focus a lot more on those sources that communities and individuals have more, I want to say, leverage and influence on. So if you take that same inventory and put the industrial emissions not on the shelf exactly, but to the side, because they're not something we can address at NERC. Now our regional carbon dioxide equivalents are about 10 million metric tons, which comes out at an average of 13 tons per person, which is not out of line. The state per capita greenhouse gas emissions are estimated to be about 11.8. So we're pretty not too far off from the state averages. Of that emissions, about 1.7 to 10 tons per capita is from residential energy, depending on where you live. So that's highly variable. Might be a good target to look at for individual communities on a one-on-one basis. and transportation across the region is 6.4 tons per capita. So that's more than half of the emissions from our region. So that's a good, not good, but as NERC is also a transportation planning organization, it means we have some tools to address transportation. Those tons also come out to about 537 metric tons per million vehicle miles traveled over the course of a year. So, like I mentioned before, where are we now? We need to establish our emission reduction targets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a few slides down. We have some guidelines on a work plan that are provided by the Environmental Resiliency Institute and ICLEI. And the overall work plan is to form a project working group, which we hope will be most of you here on this call. We need to develop an outreach and engagement strategy, both for communities and the general public, and then implement that. And that would be throughout this process. Our next step is to, as I mentioned, set a target, and then we need to give you guys a forecast. Business as usual emissions. We need to develop climate action goals and objectives, community typologies and strategies to use for different source categories. Put that all together into a climate action planning framework, and then develop a local community action plan support. How can we as a region support our communities to take the next step? So as the beginning steps of forming the climate planning work group, our aspirations at this group would have a diversity of perspectives and we get input from climate impacted communities and groups, environmental justice communities, emission source stakeholders, decision makers, implementers, influencers, and ambassadors for climate planning. And we also need a diversity of expertise. I mentioned before, NERC has a lot of expertise in transportation planning, but there's a lot of other sources that have different issues, different technical issues, different technologies. They exist in different regulatory environments and have different economic influences. So to have all those come to the table will help us learn better how to effective means to help address them in reducing emissions. We need people who have expertise in different kinds of carbon control, reduction, sequestration strategies. We need folks with local government authority and local government finance backgrounds, and communication to get that community engagement support. So in talking about levels of engagement, and Kathy Sipple, I think alluded to this at the beginning, that the first part of this task in the mission inventory was very technical and involved a lot of data collection and inputting into models. And this is an example of the levels of engagement that NERC incorporates into our public participation planning. And so right now we're at an informed stage. We just created a technical document, and now our goal is to get that information out and inform people, both you all who are stakeholders and general public. But we'd like to go forward now in the planning stage into a much more active participation role. We'd like to be engaging with people to consult with us and be involved. And move forward collaboratively. So we're going to spend a lot of time, I think, on then going forward in this meeting with talking a little bit more about that. But that's really important to us because it will increase the likelihood that the plan doesn't sit on the shelf and does get implemented, and that people understand why changes are needed. So I mentioned one of the next steps in the process is to forecast our future emissions. And ICLEI is calling this the business as usual forecast. So a lot of it is predicated on population growth. Many of the emissions are per capita, very closely related to and aligned with population. And transportation is aligned with population and with vehicle miles traveled. Those are both factors that NERC forecasts and has forecasts already adopted, although we update those every 5 to 10 years, the forecasts. So that's the first step, and we already have that in place, and I kind of showed you a table of some of our planning forecasts that NERC has already adopted as far as population growth, household growth, employment growth, and vehicle miles traveled changes. So for the most part, that part is done. But the other thing we need to capture in our forecasting of future emissions is officially documented plans and that will change the carbon intensity of energy used. So for example, we already know that NIPSCO has a published and plan to change a lot of their generation to renewable or lower carbon footprint fuels. We can go ahead and build that into our forecast. We know that EPA has got future changes in vehicle efficiency standards planned, so we can build that into our forecast. And I think I'm hoping that we will find there's future changes planned at different wastewater, drinking water, or solid waste processes that may reduce carbon emissions as well. We can build all those into our forecasts, and then we'll know what will happen if we do nothing. And those forecasts are what we will test our carbon emission reduction strategies against. I mentioned develop regional climate action goals and objectives. The first goal is to have a reduction target, and ICLEI and the Environmental Resiliency Institute is asking us, requesting us to use science-based reduction targets. What does that mean? To be a science-based reduction target, it has to be in line with the international agreements and reduction goals that have already been laid out that are necessary to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. So the international agreements are for a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050. So that's the global target. And then we were recommended a reduction target based on a method called the One Planet City Challenge method of reducing our carbon emissions by 63.4% by 2030, which is greater than the 50%. The One Planet City Challenge method incorporates a factor of human development scale as an indicator, so that wherever your nation or area is in this kind of scheme of global economic development, your emissions are adjusted based on that, based on historic. If you've already contributed to 200 years of carbon emissions, so you might get a bigger share of the immediate reduction. Although all communities need to get to that net neutrality by 2050. So it's more the time scale that the historic sources of greenhouse gas emissions and which are determined by your level of development are encouraged to reduce more or faster at the front end of the time scale. this is the method that was recommended for us by ICLEI. There are other methods available. The Deadline 2020 method is heavily reliant on per capita GDP. So you figure that out, and your remission reduction targets are scaled based on that. There's a Tyndall method that's out of England that focuses really only on energy, grid energy emissions, not on some of the other sources like solid waste and wastewater that we've included. And there's a race to zero method, which is like how fast can you get to zero? So those are some other options we could explore. For right now, at the beginning point, we're going to start with the 63.4%. But that's one area we'd like to hear some feedback from the stakeholder group on do we want to do that? So by 2030, we'd have to take our 12.8 tons per person that we had in 2017 and reduce that to 4.7 tons per person. So there's other goals and objectives. As we develop objectives, we can, do we want to set targets for specific source categories? Do we want to set targets for different communities or counties? Those are the kinds of decisions we can talk about as we develop this regional framework. Some other goals we can talk about are objectives for this process. How much effort do we want to put into vulnerability assessment, which is looking at where the climate impacts are the worst? Are they going to impact the worst, and who's it going to, and do we want to make priorities of what our emission control based on that? Do we want to put our resources into adaptation and protection for those vulnerability targets above carbon mitigation, or balance both? Those are some of the things we can talk about. We need to talk about whether we want different actions for environmental justice areas and people who already have significant environmental impacts on their locations. So those are some of the things we need to consider in our action goals and objectives. And how do we weight all those different things into our priorities? At the regional level, individual communities may choose to weigh them differently within their community, which is why we're doing a framework to help the other communities plan.
Kathy, this is Jennifer Gadzala. Do you think that if we did work on something under the vulnerability assessment, that if you did it on a regional level and then prioritized or listed worst to best, and then broke that down into communities, that at some point as monies become available for climate impact, like grants or things like that for planning and stuff like that, that vulnerability assessment could then be utilized to like prioritize where that money would go?
I definitely think so. I think that there are some tools that IU just recently showed me to do some of that assessment at the regional level. I think we could definitely do that. I think within each community they might have different priority of resources, but we can put a regional prioritization in place.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Kathy Luther, may I ask, were you ready for questions yet? Or did you have more to go?
I'm actually getting close. I think I only have 2 more slides.
Okay, if I can ask everyone else, I want to acknowledge I do see at least one hand up. If we can hold questions until Kathy completes, I think that'll help get the flow of everything down. So thank you for your patience.
So, and I was sort of getting to this. So I think that NERPC is the most effective when we provide tools for communities to help them make decisions and maybe simplify the information. There's so much information about what you could do. Maybe we can simplify it for communities going forward. And there's different ways we could do that. I'm envisioning a menu of emission reduction strategies that depending on your community, that we could have maybe a handful. And one way we could sort the communities and typologies could be on their emission profile. So the example I'm showing here are 3 communities with pretty different emission profiles. Cedar Lake's emission profile shows that residential energy is far and above the largest source of their greenhouse gas emissions. Whereas Hammond, it's commercial energy. And then if you look at Munster, they are almost even: transportation, commercial, and residential energy. So that's a good, like, we could develop a menu for a community which is most focused on residential, and a menu for community that's most focused on commercial, and a menu for a community that is balanced. But there might be other ways we want to type out the communities. There's certainly economic aspects, and there's location. And we also did not have very many of the smaller towns do an inventory. So do we need to have a separate recommendation for kind of the small, more rural parts of our region? And another thing that you won't have seen in the inventory, and that to date, is sequestration options. And I know that's of a lot of interest, and it's a good possible asset in our region, is the number of nature preserves and the national park that we have. The tool that we use so far does not give you the total emissions of, say, agriculture. It nets all that out. So here's an example, and it's not that easy to read, but it does internally generate carbon emissions from different agricultural sources and land development activities. And then it also takes certain carbon absorption out of other land activities. So for example, in this example, which I think is from Porter County, it basically uses land use and land cover to say, okay, for the amount of undisturbed forest land in the region, that pulled 100,000 metric tons of carbon out in 2017, but cattle maybe put some in. And changing forest to settlement and disturbing forest put some more in. So I think there's an opportunity to tease that out a lot more into how that would impact our emissions. And it may be, and it could be a really important part of the strategy. But that's a question for the group. How much do we want to put a lot of effort into teasing that out at the same time as we're focusing on the transportation emissions and the energy usage? And so then finally, we'll have a regional framework as NERPC. Many of you may know that NERPC is a planning organization, and really the rubber hits the road at the local government level, and people are more passionate about improving their own community. So how do we take all this information as a region and come up with a regional framework that will help to implement that? So we need a strategy for implementation.
I want to say we do have one person who's had their hand up for a pretty long time,
Okay.
and I'm not sure if I've got the first name. It looks like
Eman, yeah.
Eman, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm planning manager with the NERPC. So I think Kathy answered the part of my question, because I was about to ask about vegetation.
Mhm.
And how does that impact, of course, reduce the emission by almost 25 to 30% the carbon dioxide. But the other thing also, are you tracking emission like winter versus summer? Because in the winter we lose all of this vegetation, and that's like, is that impact the emission number somehow?
Well, so this inventory is based on an annual total. So I do think the models would capture that, because they incorporate what climate zone you're in. So they're going to capture that winter summer feature. So an inventory, the same exact inventory as ours, but based out of Arizona, would look different, come out with different results.
Mhm.
Because they have different a different temperature profile. In particular, some of the greenhouse gas emissions, like I'm thinking methane, are going to be have their methane volatilization is going to be heavily influenced by that. So I don't know if that answers your question a little bit, but I think it's baked into the modeling when you select where you are temporally.
Okay. Because I think that could like with the strategies, like we could think like winter versus summer and how to reduce emissions. Because do you know, like, because the vegetation, like it's a big thing, like if it reduces by 25% and we don't have enough vegetation in the winter, I think maybe we should consider that too.
I think that it also accounts for that. So the majority of the carbon storage is happening in the roots and the soil in area of herbaceous plants, and it's happening in the wood in the trees, like the leaves coming on and off, on and off, on and off. That sort of nets out.
Okay.
So it's the carbon that's underneath the ground that is taking most of that.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Thank you.
So are there other questions? Did I go over my time? I lost track.
I think
That was a
you're-
lot of information. That was a lot of information. So maybe people are absorbing it.
It was a lot of information. And I just ask if your question has been answered, if you could, I'm not sure I can remove your hand down, but just so we'll know it's not a new question. Do you see any other hands up, Kathy?
I'm zipping.
I'm not seeing any other. We're getting to that point on the agenda, but I would also say, if anyone does have, one or two more pressing questions, you still have a minute to raise your hand and go for it.
I have not looked in the chat either to see if there's questions there.
I'll kind of explain where we're going next, if that's okay, while we're waiting to see if questions are queuing up. There was a question from Nancy Moldenauer about will slides be provided? Is that something we can do after the fact?
Yes, and also this meeting is being recorded, and so I think we'll put that up on our YouTube channel later.
Okay, and I do see Jennifer.
Oh, sorry, same as you there, Jennifer Gonzalez.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll ask my question appropriately now. Thanks, Kathy. I dug up some things from the resilience cohort, and I had put in there the Indiana Dunes climate change adaptation document. Who produced that?
I talked to a couple people about that just last week. That was produced for the national park primarily by the Field Museum.
Oh,
so
okay. Is that something that we could use as far as like building a basis?
Yeah, I think we should use it. I think a lot of it was based on managing the natural resources for climate change. So for example, okay, the climate's going to be 1.5 degrees warmer on average. Do we plant different trees? I know that that type of information has been used at NERPC to impact our tree selection in our community tree program. So I'm not sure how much of that is about emissions reduction, although I do understand that Clean Drive Indiana is working with the park right now on inventorying all of their equipment and vehicles to change over to electric. We can certainly use their whatever they're working on as information and find out what's working for them. And I hope to do that also with the city of Gary. What's working well for them? Have they found tools that are more useful than others? But yeah, I'm actually I haven't been able to track down. A lot of people have recommended that document to me, but I haven't exactly figured out how best to incorporate it.
Okay, thanks.
And with that, I don't see any other raised hands unless anyone else does. So I would propose that we go ahead and keep moving on our agenda. If you do have pressing questions, you are still welcome to post those in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to them later or incorporate answers into our notes. So with that, I think, Kathy, could you stop sharing?
Trying to find the right window to do that exactly
Okay.
right now. There it is. Okay.
Okay, so you're ready to explain the next part, Jennifer?
Yes, I'd like to pass it to you, Kathy Sipple,
Okay.
to facilitate and explain our next activity.
Sounds good. And I do want to say I saw Victoria and Lori both added links in chat, which we will incorporate. I think that was about the Dunes Climate Action Plan. So thank you for that. Yes, so our next part, again, this is kind of an attempt to take everybody's collective wisdom in this room and have a way to just process this very complex idea, figuring out a regional climate action plan. We're actually the first in Indiana. I don't know if that's been mentioned previously. When we started this journey, there weren't too many people who had done a regional greenhouse gas inventory, fewer still that had done a regional climate action plan. So we are, relying on some best practices from people all around the country and, best practices from people in the room. So what I'd like to ask you to do is for the next minute, everybody mute. No one talks. You just take out a piece of paper, or if MS Word or Google Doc is good for you, just take a moment and do a brain dump of what are some ways that, Jen, help me out here. What's the exact words that we used? How can we?
Yep, let me just unmute here and pull it up. Yep, because we did give some consideration to exactly how we wanted that worded. Our questions were,
we don't want this to be a dusty report that doesn't get acted on. That's the background, so what can we do that would make people actually, you found it?
I do have our wording, and I'll also paste it into the chat if that's helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
So our question is, what are your ideas for creating a climate action framework that region communities will be excited to implement?
Yeah, and do you have a timer handy, Jen? I will also time it, but you're our official timer.
Yep, I'll keep an eye on the time.
Okay, so we'll let you know when that time is up. And once you're done with that, know that our next step is to pair you with someone else where you're going to kind of get to share your ideas, which they might be from a completely different part of the region. They might be in a completely different sector. That's okay. And then we're going to go from there. But that's really all you need for now. I'm going to be quiet and let you do your download. Thank you.
People excited, and also involving community participation of all ages. I'm finding that when people feel enabled to make a change, as someone wrote in the chat, people feel they need to see progress and outcomes. that helps people get involved. So having workshops at public spaces, libraries, town hall, schools, other public spaces. That's kind of my 1 minute jot.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call on the people whose faces I can see first, and wow, more people are joining the main room. So this is going to be a little challenging. Ann Massey, can I ask you to give us a couple of your top ideas?
Yeah, I kind of think a quality of life framework is important because we have such a strong identity in industry. I'm not sure if the language around just green spaces by itself or fossil fuels and just the typical language that's used with climate change is going to really make some movement and get people excited. But I do know that people want to have clean air and clean water, and they want to raise their kids near green spaces. And so talking about it in more of a quality of life framework seems to have more impact for me, like placemaking, making Northwest Indiana a beautiful and healthy place to live.
Awesome, thank you. Now, if I go through everybody that we have in our ever expanding group, this is going to get a little crazy. So what I'm going to suggest, Jen, and you tell me if this is okay, is to close all the rooms, bring everyone back, and then shuffle people up into groups of 4 or 5.
That sounds good.
Okay, let's do that. And then hopefully nobody will be alone if we've got 4 or 5. Okay, let's bring everyone back. Thank you, Ann and Connie, and everybody else. You are going to get a chance to speak, just not all here. Well, we have 57 seconds. So while we're waiting, who would like to give ideas? Anybody want to volunteer what they're sitting with? Who hasn't spoken yet? Yes, Jennifer?
Yeah, Kay and I had a nice conversation. Kay, chime in. We called ours the rolled gold idea.
What was the idea?
Rolled gold.
Rolled gold.
Yeah,
Well, I can't
Kay
wait to
came
hear
up
about
with
that. That's
Rolled-
awesome.
Go ahead, Kay, explain why.
That really was really outside the scope of what Kathy gave us the assignment for, but you know, folks, my concern or my comment on getting the community excited is giving them something that they can understand and relate to. As I was talking to Jennifer, I spoke to 300 students at Purdue in Hammond number of years ago on climate change, and I asked them how many parents had told them to turn off water while they're brushing their teeth. And of course, all the hands went up and the eyes started rolling at me. And then I said, and how many of you see that as your carbon footprint? And they didn't get it. So if you don't give them a laundry list of examples to do, they're not going to get excited. You know, you just can't tell somebody to reduce their carbon footprint. And the other example that I gave to Jennifer was that I purchased rolled gold tomato products because they're from Indiana. And I theoretically figure that their footprint is smaller than the other ketchups and canned tomatoes that are on the shelf. I may be wrong, but right now that's my theory and I'm sticking to it. And so I told Jennifer, I'm going to try to see if I can reach out to them and get some information from them concerning their carbon footprint. Maybe Amy or Virginia can help me out by giving me a contact on those.
Exactly. These are just the kinds of various ideas that come up, that bubble up from different, sectors that, that's not usually the lane that you're in, right, Kay? So this is good to use our, have our neurons.
Great idea too.
Good. Well, we're going to, again, attempt to collect all of the ideas because I know there are a lot of great ideas, a lot of people we haven't heard from. So 1-to-1, it was a little challenging. There were people that could not help but have to take a call or do something like that. So my apologies to people who did end up in a room by yourselves. This time you're going to have more friends. You're going to have hopefully 4 or 5 people in a room. So what we're looking for here is, can you share kind of the most robust ideas that you either came up alone or in a team so far, and look for themes. I've heard a few themes already, but we're going to see kind of what are the patterns that are emerging and what seems to have energy in this group. These are by no means exhaustive, but representative of who we have here in the room, right? And just to also get you thinking ahead, we're going to be asking who isn't here, who isn't here. And so if you get done early, maybe be thinking about that already. And that's another question we really want to drill down on so that we can be as inclusive and as comprehensive as possible to get all of the great ideas that are out there in the region. All right, I'm going to open up rooms again, and please just go ahead and get started. If I may ask, maybe for a spokesperson to capture your ideas on a Jamboard, just go and choose a spot. Don't worry about the numbers of the groups. Just go and scroll to a group and claim your spot. You can use Post-its, or you can just type whatever makes sense. Okay, here we go. And this time, Jen, let's give them 5 minutes since we could have up to 5 people.
Sounds good.
This meeting is being recorded.
So we have a few more seconds until, but you know what, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get the Jamboard up and get ready to harvest what people talked about. All righty. Well, we've got some groups that are milking every second. That's good to see.
Yep, they're closing in 8,
It must be
7,
interesting.
6.
7, yeah. It's good. Hopefully some juicy conversations happening, but looking forward to hearing what was said.
Right.
Welcome back all. Thank you for your patience with this new and exciting, engaging methodology. Have you ever heard that saying, if you want to go far, go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. So we want to go far. We want to go together, so we might bump a few things along the way here. But I'm wondering if I could ask for a representative from room 1. I think that was Connie, Jennifer Gadzala, Julie Whitaker, Kevin Kirkham, and I'm sorry, I don't know your first name. Morris
Richard.
Rowe. What is your Richard? Okay. Is there somebody who would be willing to tell me about some of the themes that arose from your group, and I'll record those here on the Jamboard?
I can speak for the group. The first thing that we talked about is doing your carbon calculator. So residents could log on to many different carbon calculator websites, or maybe we would select our own, just so they can get an understanding of how much carbon that themselves are putting into the atmosphere. It's really hard to make improvements unless you know where you stand. So you might say, oh, I don't travel that much. And then you see how much that impacts. And then you might be willing to, change that once you know where you stand as of yourself. The other thing that we talked about in this group and the other group was the NIPSCO billing, and how some residents on their NIPSCO bill show how they're doing against their neighbors. And it's like this friendly kind of competition, in a sense that if you see that your neighbor is using less energy and spending less money than you are, they have seen I think it was a 2% decrease in energy use from that type of mailing list. So they have a controlled residents that they sent out this type of billing to, and they've seen that when they put this little competition between their neighbors, they see a 2% decrease in energy consumption than they did with the other people that weren't getting this type of letters. So it's kind of proof of just when if someone's doing better than you, you kind of want to be the best and better yourself. So sometimes friendly competition is a good thing. The other thing that we talked about was public transportation between, all Northwest Indiana. There was questions about if we're even allowed to have public transportation that can take us to all these different type of areas. So we're not all dependent on our own individual vehicles. And that's what I hopefully explained everything correct, but that's kind of what we talked about.
Okay. And did I capture what you said accurately enough, Julie? Hopefully you're seeing my screen.
Yep.
Does that look okay?
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if from group 2, I know Angela Goodson, you said you were busy answering the phone, but we had Deb Bacchus, Elizabeth, Iman, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Kevin, and Nancy Moldenauer. Do I have a spokesperson who'd be willing to share from your group what you all talked about? Anybody? Don't make me call on someone. Iman, would you be willing to be the spokesperson? Let's see, let me see if I can see faces here. Oh, you guys have your cameras turned off.
Yeah, I can talk about the first portion, and maybe Deb can explain, you know, like she was talking also about multiple things.
Okay.
So, but the first thing we discussed is also from the land use perspective and the transportation perspective, that like is, you know, the trip, the reduction in trips, and how if we gonna continue, for example, you know, like with the work from home, is that like that really had a good impact. And I see that you have the emission like till 2017, and some did 2019. I would like to see also the calculation of the emission in the COVID between 20 and 22. So if we can get the numbers and see really if we have a significant reduction, because less people were driving to work, and also the shopping was basically was online, and we wanted to see these trends, is that like has a good impact on reduction of emission or not. So that's one of the things. The other thing that we discussed also is the railroad. Yes, we have like less people shopping, but also we have increasing in the truck traffic and congestion of the truck traffic because of the last mile delivery. And in this one also, we wanted to look at other options, and including that with our analysis are the railroad and the multimodal facilities for these railroad yards, and to like encourage people to use the railroad versus trucks on the highway. So that's one more thing that we discussed. Also, Kevin was, he just reminded us that we don't have any representative from the agriculture like agencies to be included with this task force. And that's really important for the land use. Anybody remind me if I missed something? But also Deb was talking about the different acronym and how people can understand that. So Deb, if you can talk about that. You talked about multiple things, yeah, so.
Sure. So what I was thinking about, and what Elizabeth and I had talked about in our two people, was the notion of, to bring people on board. For me, it's about making sure, and I think Kay made some comments about this as well, making sure that people understand why they're doing it and why it's advantageous to them. So I'm always very interested in win-win situations. So starting with strategies where, one, we use language that isn't divisive, and unfortunately the word climate sometimes is more divisive than resilience or looking at vulnerability and how you mitigate such, that using the right language to engage people so they understand, but also then people being able to see the benefits. What benefit does somebody get? That the environment wins, but you also win because you've reduced your cost of gasoline or your cost of local foods. Elizabeth and Nancy, I think, commented more at the community level and how we can engage the community, churches and block clubs and small groups of people across our neighborhoods. And Elizabeth was quite interested in community gardens and what the role they could play, and particularly restaurants taking on rooftop gardens. So it becomes local food where you're not driving trucks from California to here, but you're growing your own food nearby and seeing what impact that might have.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that was really juicy, and I get so excited writing all of these. Maybe I should say, how about we ask groups to give us maybe your top like 3, just so we make sure the last group still has something. They won't think like, oh, well, the ideas have been covered. But even if you're saying, hey, we also talked about that, that's still great that we're seeing some trends. So thank you for that. So let's see. Oh, okay, wonderful. Group 3, you use the board. Is this actually the right people with the right notes? David?
I took notes for group 3. So that was
way to go. Way to go. Well,
that was
Virginia,
David, Rachel, Deb, Chubb, and I. But David, if you want to add anything I may have missed in the notes.
And congratulations for nailing the technology.
yes, way to go, Virginia.
Not my first rodeo. We're 2 years into Zoom, right?
Yeah. Well, who would like to be the spokesperson for your group to just take us through what you came up with? Would you be willing to do that, Virginia?
Yeah, somebody's got to read it to us because it's too tiny a print.
I'm going to pass the mic to David, and everybody else that was in our group has had to step away, I believe.
Okay. I'll zoom a
I'm
little bit
still
here.
here if David would like to pass the baton to me. I'd be happy to cover it.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks,
Okay,
Victoria.
great. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for taking the notes, Virginia. Our group had a lot of great ideas. I think as Deb Chubb was leaving, she started to talk about how we could create leadership in our communities that would address climate issues, modeled after perhaps the Sustainability Commission in Michigan City, and how cool it would be to have that kind of commission in all of our communities. And I know I personally would be very excited to join the board of an outfit like that in Chesterton. We also talked a lot about how pollinator gardens, my passion for all things sustainable and supporting biodiversity is planting with natives and seeing the beautiful reward that you get not only through the flowers but through the butterflies and pollinators that then visit your garden, and having some kind of incentive to recognize people for their efforts or to encourage them to do more. And that these kinds of ideas are scalable. These are things that we could be doing individually at home, and have, full control and power. But we could also join, groups in our communities and try to do native plantings around our communities. But then we could also try to scale up to the county level, and have like competitions, county by county, that could be run through extension maybe, as I'm thinking about it. And would you be able to zoom out? I want to make sure I'm not missing any of the notes that, thank you, Kathy, that Virginia jotted down. Okay, yeah. Another idea that came up, I think it was Deb Chubb again, was to develop a speakers bureau that could be called on to go out and deliver stock presentations to town councils or boards that are interested in pursuing climate resilient strategies or taking action steps, just so that there's always a resource available for people to learn what to do and how to do it. We talked a lot about the donut economy, the closed loop system, and how it would really excite us if we could participate in consumer practices that had built-in climate resilience or sustainability to them. There's some kind of pack that you can't send off on your own. You have to drop it off at recycling, but if you don't have the bin, then you can't do it. So there's complications, but there's also, I think, opportunities for our communities to scale that up. Some of our communities offer free compost, where you can put your yard waste out and drop it off for free, and then that's turned into compost, and then you have free compost in your community. That's a wonderful thing that happens in Chesterton. Well, imagine if we had some like community system for taking all of the things that we buy that we can't recycle but would put in the trash. Maybe there's a way to do that at scale. And Virginia had some really nice thoughts about how it would be helpful for short, mid, and long range strategies to be developed, so that there was some kind of, easy low-hanging fruit reward, easy win in the beginning, but to recognize that things take time, and we have to keep our eye on a long-term strategy. And I think that was about it. I don't know if the other folks from the group wanted to chime in on anything I may have missed. We had a really nice discussion.
The only other sort of like high level thing that I would like to highlight is just that we think it's really important to not just focus on action items for consumers, but also action items for retailers, for industry, for municipalities, and recognizing that at the end of the day, individual consumers as one person has very little impact on those pie charts that we saw. So having strategies that are scale appropriate to the person, the household, the city, the business, all of these different levels.
Thank you. And thank you for whoever added Rachel. She was missing from my list, so I appreciate that addition. And I was smiling when you said, I wish there was a place where we could recycle to scale. If Angela Goodson had been able to join your group, she probably could have told you about the wonderful recycling facility that they have in Lake County. It's just absolutely awesome. But hopefully she can talk about that some other time. Thank you. So I think we just have one group left, and it's they were in room 5. It's Ann Massey, David Wright, Jacob Tush, Kay Nelson, and Lori Kegel. Would one of you be willing to be the spokesperson for your group? And I'm just going to leave it on this page.
I'd be happy to do it. It's
Thanks,
Lori.
Lori.
Kegel. Sure.
Thanks, Lori.
I thought I put a sticky note somewhere, but Lord knows where it went.
Okay.
So
You probably did. You probably did.
I will chat nonetheless. I'm
Okay,
sure
I'll
I did
type
it
for you.
inaccurately. So one of the things we talked about that kind of rose to the top was changing the message based on your audience and meeting people where they're at. So, the discussion with municipal leaders may be different from those of community members, et cetera. We also talked about the need for bringing the agriculture community into play. Jacob was with our group and said he deals a lot with farmers. We also talked about the need to incentivize plans whenever possible. Everybody has a budget. So explaining the cost savings with energy and fuel savings is key. And then, potential funding mechanisms to help to make those things a reality is really key. Helping individual residents understand their own savings as well. Also important to understand that some people really care about climate change in the environment and will come to it for that reason. Others may not know how they feel about climate change, and the word climate's a bad word, but they may care about reducing dependence on imported petroleum and supporting domestic fuels and energy sources. So, kind of gets to that meeting people where they're at, right? Also need to future-proof this plan to make sure it's fluid enough to change as legislation and incentives change. We also talked a little bit about kind of getting down to the neighborhood level, taking it to where residents meet versus having them come to us. Neighborhood associations, community groups, talked about faith-based organizations and how it's different when you hear it from your pastor or priest or imam versus somebody from government, and how that changes. And also talked about, let's see here, I'm looking here a little bit, making the message somewhat tactile, relating to things that people can really relate to, and giving them tasks that they may be able to take on to meet greater resiliency that are easily achievable, from kind of small to large, realizing that they all make a difference, kind of that it all adds up messaging.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you feel complete? Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And was that your complete group too? That was Ann Massey, Jacob, you and Kay. Is that right?
It was Jacob, Kay, David, Wright, and myself. The
Okay.
four of us
I
were
think
there.
we might have had a little trouble getting Ann in there. You would have had somebody from agriculture in there. She is a farmer and she
Great.
is awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I'll add that later. I don't want to just be typing loudly while you guys are waiting. So I'm seeing some themes emerge, and you know, faith-based was something that a few of you said. I'm hearing scale, you know, give people things they can do, individual citizens, but I think it was Virginia who said, you know, a bunch of us, one person at a time, we're not going to hit those numbers. We need to scale for, you know, communities and, you know, all of the sizes, right? And then let's see, I heard several people talk about food, and it is great that we had both Ann and Virginia here from the Northwest Indiana Food Council. I don't know that they introduced the fact that they actually produce food and they also work with food producers, but I think, you know, we could definitely lean into that. I heard youth involvement, and we obviously didn't have any youth here with us today. So what I'd like to do is just go to the next thing that we were talking about, which is who needs to be here to create that exciting plan that we just talked about. What would be the elements of that? There are people that weren't in this room today that could help us make that happen. You know, I just started out with a few. Can we say, let me just see if you can help me out here. I'm going to say youth. Who else? Did we have any faith-based groups here today? We've got 24 people, so I might need Jen to help me see if somebody wants to unmute or raise your hand. Elizabeth, I see you've got your hand raised. Could you unmute and let me know what you're thinking?
Yeah, I'd like to see how many students would come out in East Chicago. Here they have a environmental club. Mr. Marshall, maybe you could help me out here. I'd like to see them get out more into the community and have hands-on with, oh, I can show you how to do that, and your roses won't grow so well if you have them here, or something like that. Get out into the community and talk to their neighbors.
Okay, so definitely, I think we're hearing a trend that we've got to, you know, bring this show out into the communities. We can't expect everybody to be able to come, you know, on a Thursday in the middle of the day. It's just not going to work for everybody. So that's like a category of people who needs to be here, and also might be a strategy where we need to go to them. I'm going to go ahead and put in faith-based, because I didn't hear anybody say that we had anybody here today that was with faith-based community. I'm just going to come right out and say it too. I'd really love to see more diversity in terms of, you know, geography. We didn't have everybody say exactly where they're from, but I'm not hearing maybe people from like South County in Lake County, for instance. Lake County is our most populous, really everywhere, like everywhere, you know, more mobility centered agencies. Great. I'm going to also bring up people who serve people who have disabilities, you know, the elderly. I think some people who are particularly, you know, hit when they can't get someplace because of a flood or because of heat. You know, we haven't really talked about some of the outcomes of climate. We've just been talking climate, but, you know, flooding is a big deal. Dan Repay was here before. I know I've heard their group talk a lot about flooding. So, you know, people who deal with the cost of flood, a few of you said, follow the money, talk about win-wins. The cost of flooding is kind of a big deal. So if we even had other people from other of the groups like Dan's, you know, the Little Calumet River Basin Development, people like that. I know there are several. So what else have we got here? Anybody? I'm going to go ahead and write down what I said, but please jump in there on Jamboard. It seems like some of you are getting it. We had actually invited some people from, what do I want to say? Oh my, tourism. Yes. I'm not that old yet, tourism, because, you know, if we don't have, you know, nice weather and nicely forested areas and things like that, that can really impact tourism, people that wanting to come. Environmental justice groups, awesome, thank you. Transportation, wonderful. Union workers, great. We had invited a few people from like NAACP and some other groups like that. And I would love to see more from there as well. What else did I say? Disability community. I don't know if that's like really the right way to say it, but I did reach out to, I think, Opportunity Enterprises, just because I know that executive director pretty well, but I know there are other organizations and people who serve that. I'm going to go ahead and say groups that help the elderly or that address the elderly. Any other wide swaths of groups? Good. We have environmental justice. I'm going to kind of group those two together.
And we do have a question, Kathy S., if you would entertain it.
Please.
Someone in the chat is asking, can we again explain the focus and goal of the work on the part of NERC? I agree with Kay. What is the precise defined goal and what groups can help us get there? So maybe we've got the two Kathys, Kathy S. and Kathy L. as well. I wonder if Kathy L., maybe you could speak to that a bit.
I'm going to let Kathy Luther do that.
Well, so I think our goal as the regional council and planning commission is to create a framework that will help all the local communities, but we need to still bring the public along with us, right? So we need to bring them along with us. So when elected officials from a particular community or the community leaders or whoever wants to start a action plan, they don't have to start from scratch. But so we need a public outreach component, but I'm heavily focusing on strategies that communities can implement to develop their own planning specific plans, if that makes sense. So I want to provide tools and possible goals and strategies, and the economic piece and the effectiveness piece, and including on communication and community engagement. Put all the tools that will work the best and give them to the communities to use. So my end result is going to be a probably regional goals in transportation, regional goals in emission reduction, and different strategies that we think would work in our region in different communities for them to choose from, to take to their individual jurisdiction.
And I also see Kay's hand raised. Kay, does that answer your question, or do you have another question?
Well, it gets us going in a better direction. Thank you, Kathy, for those comments. I'm glad you went before I popped up my mouth. You know, we have hit on so many things, Kathy Sipple, during the course of this conversation that my head is spinning. And obviously, I'm looking at this more from the economic development perspective hat that I wear here at the forum, and recognizing that we all want to work towards improving our air quality, and the fact that our carbon footprints are a big part of that, even though it's not a permitted emission. And so I think what Kathy had, the two breakdowns there, transportation, and I forget the other one. I should have been taking notes while she was talking, but I wasn't smart enough, because she laid out that underneath both of those headings, she wanted to put, you know, audiences. And so perhaps your leadership team can work on the comments that were provided to you on the sticky notes, which is a cool thing I've never seen it used before. And identify audience groups. I mean, you know, we don't need to write a dissertation for a particular audience group. It can be very short. It could be a one-pager. You know, I mean, when we first socialized recycling, where did we go? We went to the third graders. We didn't go to mom and dads or grandma and grandpas or the elected officials. We went to the third graders and taught them to pester their parents into recycling. That's pretty much where this could possibly start as well. Old habits are hard to break.
And
So that's my 2 cents and I'll shut up.
no, okay, don't shut up. And I did not mean to to jump in on you, but I did want to take this moment to maybe refer to something and ask Kathy Sipple if I can put you on the spot. I don't want to interrupt your process, but to Kay's point that she just made, I wonder if it would be useful if you clarified a little bit about kind of how you envision the overlapping work groups, because I do wonder
Yeah.
if that might be a mechanism for grouping some of these stakeholder groups, which are so broad, into groups, kind of as Kay was just alluding to.
Yeah, I really thought about including a slide that showed that. And then I thought, you know what, I don't want to just jam my idea down your throat, but so I don't have that image ready to pull up. But if you can envision this, kind of a group that's our core cluster that's agreeing to be, you know, the hub of a spoke, if you will, that says we're not trying to do all of this. We're not going to say, hey, watch us make the sausage to try to address all of these and come up with a one pager for all of these. We're just saying, let's think about who might be impacted by this and invite them to have input in some way. Probably not all at one meeting, but if we can take this show on the road and go to a group where the youth gather, or go to a group where the tourism is already talking about this and just layer it on with climate, think of a separate satellite circle that exists outside that deals with any one of these things, or perhaps, you know, each of these has different circles. And then we've got, you know, kind of a representative that links them back to the hub that can be responsible for taking the core messages that impact them from these discussions and make sure they know about it. And also, you know, I think Victoria mentioned the Speakers Bureau. Maybe, you know, that they know we have people who are willing to come and talk to them about how to do native plants, or we can talk to them about, you know, different things from the menu that Kathy Luther brought up at the beginning. You know, if we can just make sure that it's easy to get the information to people, we won't do it though unless we've thought about who needs it. So hopefully that makes sense. We are going to, you know, do this in a series of meetings, and we're going to be developing our next meeting's agenda based on some of the things that were churned up this time. So what we're really looking is for you to help co-create that next agenda. And I and Kathy and Jen and Renee will be sorting through this and trying to bring it into some sense. I think that satellite system would work really well based on what came up today. But Kay, I hope you'll stick with us and not get too big of a headache as we manage to tease these things into some, you know, semblance of a design that makes sense. Is that what you wanted me to share, Jen? Or is there any interpretation that you would add from a NERC perspective that you think would help folks engage with that?
Yeah, no, I think that was great, Kathy. And, you know, I think we are going to continue to be adaptive based on the input today, like you said. I do think, Kay, your point of just kind of maybe putting these people in buckets is well received. And I think we do have top of mind kind of a mechanism once we see who was here today and who was suggested as, hey, maybe these people are missing, getting some sort of a structure that we have sort of, I guess, Kathy, you've kind of called them interlocking circles, or kind of a core group that then branches out to these additional kind of sub work groups that might emerge. So I do see Lori with her hand up.
Yes, thanks, Jen. The reason I was asking about the kind of ultimate goal is I'm hearing all sorts of great suggestions that kind of are in the environmental realm. But, you know, Kathy Luther's presentation, which I've seen, you know, a couple of different times at a couple of NERC. I'm like, I'll give it free next time, Kath. But no,
probably better.
No. But you know, is focused on, you know, here's where we're at, here's where we want to get, here's where we'd like to get in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions. How are we going to reach this goal? And I think that as we continue this work and this exercise as a group, given everybody has their own special interests, that it's going to be critically important to keep that ultimate goal in mind. you know, how do we help our region reach this goal? And that messaging needs to be, you know, consistently at the forefront of our work, or else we're not going to get focused enough to make this happen and to help people get the tools they need to help us reach that goal. That's all. Soapbox off.
Can I ask Lori, since you're so great at messaging, do you still have your hand up saying that you would be willing to help us shape that messaging and help us get that word out?
What I will say is we are contracted to NERC for air quality.
Lots of things.
Yes, but air quality messaging and programming, so that whatever is within our scope with NERC through our contract would be decided by Kathy and Carl. That's the appropriate answer.
That was a really good.
Well,
thank you. And Kathy, or I'm sorry, Lori, your comments are really well received. I agree completely. I think we need to keep coming back to what is our goal, what are we doing? And I think, you know, we're focused a lot in our process, and as ICLEI has advised on, you know, community engagement, making sure all the stakeholders that are at the table, simply so that we can make sure that different groups are represented in terms of kind of the equity of, you know,
which is critically important. And I agree 100%.
Impacted. But I agree with you. At the end of the day, our goal is to develop a framework for meeting science-based targets. And how are we going to do that? So that's kind of the core work. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy L. But in order to do that, we also want to just make sure that we're hearing from different groups, so that if you know, we're not overlooking, like, you know, hey, this disproportionately impacts certain groups. So I agree.
Absolutely.
With you completely. Keep goal focused.
I think both are important. I agree completely.
And I'm hoping, I think I had a slide about diversity of expertise and diversity of interest. So some things are going to be pretty technical. How can we reduce the emissions from the solid waste suite, which includes transportation, includes composting, it includes landfills and methane, and probably you know, how do we manage those? And then on the other end, how do we get, it's the public consumer end, right? And so there's some people here may have a lot more expertise on communication or working with communities, and other people may have a lot of expertise in solid waste. And other times maybe we have to reach out to more technical specifics, or, you know, or building. I know NIPSCO's done quite a few initiatives on energy conservation in the home. You know, how we need to learn more about how effective that is, and barriers to do it, and benefits to do it, and how much of that do we want to hang our hat on or not? That's the kind of thing. So there's two tracks, right? There's individual getting, how do we get people to do things and what works, and how effective it is, so we can tag numbers onto it.
And I want to say, Jen is having to go. She just messaged me. And I want to acknowledge we have about 6 minutes left, and we are committed to ending on time. I do see Victoria's hand up. Victoria, do you have kind of a quick question? We do need to reserve a little bit at the end for just housekeeping and the wrap up. Is it a quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that something visible that people would recognize easily across the region that's connected with this effort would be great. And as you guys are thinking about how this is going to shake out, the Morton Arboretum has this really cool program where they have these huge flags that you can get to put around your tree, and it shows how much carbon that tree removes from the atmosphere. And I know that what we're working on here is much broader than just trees, but it's a very visible thing. You know, they're posted outside libraries and different places, very visible. So some catchy visual that can be shared across the region with our communities, so that they're bite-sized information that they'll understand. That's all.
I already have a plan for that, because we did that. We have that.
Well, awesome. Very awesome. And I will say Goshen, I know they have like a catchy slogan. It's 45 by 45, 45% tree canopy by 2045. So something like that layers on, you know, there are all kinds of places we can go. Interesting. So what I want to ask you in our remaining time together, and we don't have time for 24 of us to go around the room and hear from everybody, is if you can put in chat again, how are you leaving the meeting? you know, did you feel energized by this meeting, or was it just too much information, anything like that? If you can just tell us how are you leaving the meeting versus how you came in? And hopefully, are you willing to join us for the next meeting? If I could envision how it would look, I think we would be meeting in smaller breakout sessions after a plenary session where we kick things off and kind of synthesize where we've left it today. And then you'll probably get to kind of choose your own adventure to some extent. If you really are somebody who's pulled to work on, you know, renewable energy or transportation or community gardens or native plants, I would expect, just based on where my mind is going and preliminary conversations we've had, that you'd have more chance to plug in and talk to like-minded others, and we could start to do some mapping. I've got some background in asset-based community development, and that just assumes that you build on what you do have and what you can do. So yes, there are the constraints of what NERC can do as a planning commission. There are the constraints of what, you know, we can do with the bandwidth that we currently have. If it's just Renee and I very part-time, and Kathy and Jen as part of their staff time with NERC. But the more we have joining us for this work group, we did think about, do we want to call it a work group or a task force? We're not going to be the bosses handing out tasks. We actually need people to roll up sleeves, give us ideas, and join in. So thank you for the comments that are coming in. If you haven't checked out already, please do. And also, please tell us what we can do differently or better next time. What did you like about this meeting format? What would you really like to see that could be different? We obviously had a few, you know, struggles with the breakout rooms. We're aware of that, but if there's anything else that you can tell us, or if you want to tell us that again, that we already know, that's fine too. Just let us know. We want to continually be doing this to make it better. So I want to finally turn the microphone over to you, Kathy Luther, to close us out. Is there anything else that you need to say as our leader?
And if I could just, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut my boss off. Like, jump in here quickly, boss. Before I jump out, I just want to thank everyone for their time today. And I want to really encourage you, don't hold back. We have thick skin. If you have ideas for improving our meetings and how we go about this, we're all ears. So, you know, put it in the chat. If you're more comfortable sending a private message, do that. You're always welcome to email me at jbirchfield@nerpc.org or any of our other kind of team members with any of your feedback. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, Jen just said most of what I was going to say, but thank you very much for coming. I think that everybody here, I appreciate their input because everybody knows their community or their industry or their point of view best. I'm really excited that there's this much interest in this, and we're going to be working really hard, especially when David joins us shortly on the team, on doing the technical aspect of this, the forecasts and the best practices and things, so that we can give you more concrete things to react to as well.
Thank you very much for everybody who's already saying they'll be at the next meeting. We really appreciate it. And bring a friend, especially if they fall under any of the categories that we said are missing here. And I do want to say, besides like hearing from everybody, we also want to make sure there aren't unintentional consequences of doing something that helps carbon, but doesn't help people that we don't really know how it's going to impact the people of a certain community. So that's why it's really important to have all stakeholders and all people that might be affected, you know, here represented, so we can take that into account. Anything else, Kathy?
Nope, that's all I have. I think we're right on time.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I think we've got this. Together, we've got this. Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.